Hello and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Jeff Rasmussen, your host, broadcasting to you live from Middleton, Idaho. Today we have Devin Lee with us for her class, Use MyHeritage Records to Quickly Discover and Write the Story of Your Ancestors. So I'm glad to have Devin here, and I'm also glad to have more than 1,300 of you who have registered for the live webinar. So wherever and whenever you are, glad to have you with us. And this was announced just today. The Norway Church Records 1815 to 1938 collection was just added to MyHeritage. The records in this collection were digitized in collaboration with the National Archives of Norway and consist of more than 42 million indexed records and high-quality scans of the original documents. So this brings the total number of historical records on MyHeritage to 12.6 billion with a B. Okay, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Devin Noel Lee specializes in preserving and sharing family memories and motivating budding genealogists. She has created and published 60 scrapbooks, a memoir, 2 ancestor biographies, and 6 family history how-to books. She educates and inspires the genealogy world through videos at familyhistoryfanatics.com. Please put together your virtual hands and let's give Devin Lee a nice warm webinar welcome. Hi, Devin, and welcome to the webinar.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
So nice to have you. Looking forward to learning from you and from the topic. It sounds like a really fun topic and one that we all, I'm sure, will appreciate. And
for sure.
Your screen looks really good, Devin, so the time is all yours.
Fantastic. Well, hello to everyone from wherever you are. I live on a mesa outside of a volcano in northern New Mexico, and it is stunningly beautiful and a very interesting desert. So it's new to us. We moved here at the beginning of September, but I was super excited to be able to talk about one of my absolute favorite topics in the world, which is writing your ancestor stories, and combine that with a fun resource of MyHeritage to organize my data, find new resources to supply the content for my writing. So just for a moment, I want you to think, are you like this man? When you think of writing family histories, does it just ooze out of you? You could be in a coffee shop or your back porch in the mountain like I am now, or this is the most enjoyable thing in the world. Just give you a quiet place and you can have at it. Or are you more the type of writer where you would much rather jump out of an airplane, which you are afraid of heights, than to write a family story? Now, I fall in the between. To be perfectly honest, I didn't start out as a writer. In fact, in elementary school, I failed creative writing. I could never get grammar and spelling to be my friend. But when I was finally taught how to write in a formulaic style, all of a sudden I said, yes, I can write. I can write because I know some steps. And when I know some steps, then it makes it super, super easy. The other thing that unlocked my ability to write about my ancestors when I focus on who I'm writing toward. Now, I do have a tip that you really shouldn't care too much about your audience when you first start writing. But ultimately, are you trying to write for your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, distant cousins, children? Or that ancestor or family member who doesn't really think they like genealogy, but you tell them a story and they're hooked? That's my kind of writing. And this is my son, who is in his final year of high school, but he now lives in Houston. So I'm writing towards him. Actually, that's the picture from a long time ago. But whenever I write, I think of writing to him because he wasn't always going to be in my home, but he's going to want to love to read stories. So let me tell you the dirty little secret. I heard about this book, The Comfort Family History. And, prior to 2000, these are kind of the books that were were made, and we're so grateful as researchers. But do you think that young man in the picture that I just showed you would really care about Byron Beamer? Now, if you're a relative of Byron Beamer, you're super excited that I just flashed him on the screen. But I couldn't even tell you who Byron Beamer is and how I'm related to him. So this is not the style of family history that I want to encourage you to write. And if you think, oh, but I could just use legacy software and hit the publish button and I'm good to go. Well, yes, that's the start. What I want you to get to eventually is to write about one ancestor, because you give someone like this a story about one ancestor and they're going to read it. And like my cousins who are related through the same grandpa, Papa, they didn't really like my genealogy stories. They got really bored. But when Christmas, I finished this book. My aunt sent them copies and they said, when are you going to write the next one? So if you want to have that kind of success, then I want you to come along with the journey of how MyHeritage can help you write about your ancestors and make it super duper easy. So the first thing you need to do is you need to build your tree over on MyHeritage or any platforms, but we're going to focus on MyHeritage. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to tell you how to do that. There are training videos in the knowledge-based community over on MyHeritage that will tell you how to build your tree. So I'm going to let those experts teach you how to build your tree. But once you get your information built, then I want you to pick one ancestor. You're going to write about just one ancestor at a time. In a lot of virtual events I go to, or a lot of writing workshops, people ask me, how do I write about, 3 families that lived in Boston? And I say, you don't. You start with one person and tell their story, and then you can add more characters to that story about perhaps Geraldine and how they interact with her. And once you've finished your story about Geraldine, if you want to add more characters, like a Percy Jackson novel follows multiple different characters, not just Percy, well, you have the different stories and you can weave them together, but you can't accomplish that until you've written about the first person first. So throughout this workshop, we're going to pick on, or rather utilize the woman whose fault it was that my family moved to Houston, Texas, rather than McAllen, Texas. She lived in McAllen, died in McAllen, and said, yeah, you need to go to Houston instead. So it's all her fault. If you're from McAllen, you can also blame her for why I didn't come move in McAllen. So the first thing you need to do after you select who you're going to write about is you're going to make a basic sketch. So that's when you're going to go to MyHeritage and you're going to look at your profile. So let me just show you how you actually get there on MyHeritage. Let me switch screens. So typically you enter into MyHeritage and you look at your tree. I'm in love with the fan view, but you might have the pedigree chart or the other views. Find your ancestor and then click on their names and get the profile, that side profile, and then click on profile one more time and open that up, and then you get to this view. I go back to the slideshow for just a minute. Oops, not that one. There we go. When I go in and out, sometimes it just doesn't play nicely with me, so just give me a second. There we go. All right. So you go to the profile, and the first thing you want to do is you want to write your very first sentence. Now, here's the secret. Every first sentence starts with a subject and a verb. So your subject is going to be your person. And what was the first verb? Well, they were born, and it'll look something like this. Geraldine is the daughter. So is the verb. You can also add to her birth date and things of that nature. So let me switch over to my writing program, and we will see what that looks like, the very first story. You can see we start with Geraldine is the daughter. When we go over to the profile, we can pick up her birth date and place and her death date and place. Now, some of you may be thinking, but I haven't fully researched her yet. Well, that's okay. That comes later. I truly believe that if you want to be a better researcher, you write stories based on what you've gathered. Then you'll find the gaps in what you've collected to go back and fill in the gaps. So you write to be a better researcher, and you research to be a better writer. So we're going to go and we're going to make a sentence that looks a lot like this. Geraldine Gertrude Rang is the daughter of Edward Rang and Gertrude Long, and this is when she was born, and that's her first date. Now, there are so many people who say, I just can't start. Start by putting words on that blank screen with the very first sentence, but don't stop there. And how do you not stop there? Well, that's when we go back to the slideshow and we continue forward. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a timeline of the additional facts between the birth and the death. Now, I also have some samples in the handout for this presentation that shows you how to write a simple birth story, a simple death story, and a marriage story. They're all over on my blog. You can find the first two links in the handout, and then you'll be able to navigate to the third once you get over to the blog. But back to the timeline. You want to fill in the dash between the dates. And to do that, you create a timeline of all the events you found in your ancestors' life. Well, MyHeritage has this view that originally we looked at the info tab, and now I'm looking at the events tab, and you can see every instance of an event where I've found a record and I was able to place Geraldine in a time and place. So then I'm going to take this starting point timeline that MyHeritage has put together for me, and I'm going to transfer this over to my writing program. Now, some of you are thinking, well, what writing program should I write in? Honestly, in the drafting phase, it does not matter. Do not get a writing program that you're unfamiliar with, because you're going to spend more time trying to figure out how to use that writing program than get your draft written. When you're in the editing and formatting phase, then we can talk about different writing programs. But I'm using Google Docs. It's one of my go-tos because we have 5 people in my family. Before the move, we had 7 in our household. And I never knew which computer I'd have access to. Sometimes it would be the office computer, sometimes it would be the laptop, sometimes it would be something else. So Google Docs worked for me, so I didn't have, it's because it's in the cloud, but you can use whatever program you want to write. But notice how I took the events that I had over there listed on MyHeritage, and I put it into a life section timeline. So most everybody's going to have about, and a lot of us are going to have ancestors where they have a young adult year. From that time forward, it's going to depend on the person you're writing about. Sometimes it's motherhood, sometimes it's military, sometimes it's business. You get the idea. But take the events in a timeline and then cluster them into these groups. And now your timeline is your outline. Now, I am not a fan of outlines when I write. I like to mind dump, and then I like to organize everything. But your timeline becomes your outline, and now you can turn your timeline into sentences. So record by record, event by event, you turn those into sentences, and then those sentences become paragraphs. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to pick the 1900 census. That's the first record beyond her birth that I have gathered on MyHeritage. I'm going to start right there. So I go over to MyHeritage, and I love on the profile page that I see these little snapshots of the images. So I'll click on the 1900 census, and it takes me right here. So I need to turn the details that I see on this census record. Her name is the third one there. There's Elizabeth Long, Gertrude Rang, and Rang is crossed out, and Geraldine with a line meaning ditto to the name before. So I'm going to extract all of the details on this census record. So take a moment and think, how would I turn that into a sentence? Or a couple of sentences if you find more details. Would it look something like this? In 1900, 5-year-old Geraldine Rang lived with her mother, Gertrude, in the household of her, oh darn, I have an editing error. We're going to come back to that in a minute. WM for William L. Long in Plymouth, Virginia, Huron County, Ohio. She was the family number 134 found on sheet 6. Now, did I extract all of the details from that census record? What do you think? Did I? Well, let me go out here and use this handy dandy little write-on screen writing tool. Now remember, I'm writing for that young man, right? In my mind, it's a young man. So just a second, get rid of that line. This information right here is very academic, and it belongs in a citation. Absolutely, we're going to talk about citations in a minute, but when you're writing, it kind of breaks what we like to call the third wall or the fourth wall of writing. It gets you out of the story and into academic mode. So I recommend leaving it out if you're going to be writing for your family. If you're going to write for a journal, then you can go ahead and leave it in. So let me get another color, and we're going to talk about, remember, did we get all of the details from that record? Woo! Sometimes things go a little crazy when you don't want them to. All right, give me a second. Technology is great when you love it. All right, so let me just talk through it while we're trying to figure out what's wrong with that right there. The first thing is her mother. So we know that Geraldine is 5 years old, but how old is her mother? That's a very good question, and would be really nice if you could put that in there. The next thing is she's in the household of her grandfather, William Lester Long. But what else? We don't know the occupation of William or Gertrude. We don't know how old William is. And remember, there was that name right above Gertrude. Well, that was Elizabeth. That was someone else in the household. Well, who was she, and how was she related to Gertrude? And the things going on and on and on. So now we're going to switch to a better entry. So here, I'm going to zoom in a little. And Jeff, if you can't see my Googles, let me know. If you can, I'm just going to keep going as if you can. All right. So here in 1900, we have that introductory sentence, and I went ahead and made that correction. And I had the ages of her grandparents. I had both names. From the record, I knew, and I could extrapolate, they were in their 25th year of marriage. And look at all the extra details I have. He was a migrant to Ohio, meaning he wasn't originally from Ohio. And then we know that Agnes was originally from Ohio, but her father wasn't and her mother was. So you can pull out every single detail from that census record because all of the details helps you establish setting. It helps you establish character, mood, and so on and so forth. Now here is a little note. How many of you have paid attention to the census records that tell you there's an agricultural schedule that you need to go look up? In this case, I am going to add that I need to look up that agricultural census, but I'm not going to go look up the agricultural census right now. I'm just going to focus on this one census record and always have a to-do list. When I forget a record that I haven't gathered, I can make a note. I can also, if I discover something else that I hadn't even thought of, I can make a note. If I don't understand anything, I can make a note. And I can always come back during the editing phase to fix it. Don't stop writing to go do more research, or you're never going to finish writing. Let me go back to this slideshow, and hopefully we can get it fixed. If we can't, you'll have to give me a second to reload it. It looks like we're going to have to reload it. All right. Okay. All right. Hey, Jeff, is there a way you can hide my screen for a section while I go find that slideshow that I just crashed?
Yep, sure.
All right, thanks. Now you have to fill the gap for just a second.
Oh, well, while you're doing that, I'm honestly thinking about doing this for my my favorite ancestor that I haven't not yet done this for, and so I'm appreciating the ideas so far.
Awesome. Great. Well, you can switch back because I got it working.
Okay, good. Here you go.
Alrighty. Anyway, technology, gotta love it.
Yep.
Thanks for hopping in there and saving my bacon.
Sure.
All right, so while you're turning your timeline into sentences, notice earlier I didn't have that word grandfather and I should have had it. Many of you are looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh, she has so many syntax errors, she has spelling errors, she has commas in the wrong spot, and that is okay. Because in your first draft, do you know what the goal of your first draft is? The goal of your first draft is to finish it. That's it. You do not need to be worried about where the comma goes, what voice you need to use. All of that happens during the editing stage. So turn off your inner critic, turn off your anxiety, turn off your doubt that anybody's going to like reading it. Turn all of that off, and just finish your first draft. Okay. So now that you've taken that one record and extracted all of the cool details that record is trying to tell you, now you need to cite your source. Don't leave the story writing phase until you've pulled out all of the details on that record, and then don't close out that record and move on to another record until you have cited your sources. Now, how are you going to cite your sources? Well, MyHeritage makes it super, super easy. Whenever there's a record, they have a little snapshot for the information you need to extract and turn into a citation. And your citation is going to look a little bit like this. Now, I'm not an expert in citation writing, which is why I'm super excited that Legacy Family Tree Webinars has 2 webinars that can help you with citations. The first is crafting the citation, and the one on the right is how to do it in the Legacy software. So I highly recommend you go and find out how to craft a good citation from the information you have on MyHeritage so you can put it into your story. But where is it going to go? Well, now we're going to go back to Google Drive. Now, you can do this in Google Drive, Apple Pages, Microsoft Word, LibreOffice, all of those programs. Again, it's a drafting phase, so we don't really care that the formatting is perfect. But all you need to do in order to add a citation is after the first time you mention a time or a place or some information, you go to insert, go to the end of the sentence, insert footnote, and then you start typing your source right here. Well, let me scroll up so you can see, right? You just type your source right there, copy and paste your source right there. That's where it goes. So this is what it would look like. Notice that this is a number 2 on the screen because I'm adding a second source into my document. So that's really great advantage of using Google Docs. It'll just, anytime you add a source, it'll automatically update the source citation numbers, which is great. And you can see that the source citation's right here. I don't have to mention that line, that page number, family number, that all goes in the source citation at the bottom of the page. Now, we can talk about where source citations go when you make your final draft. It all depends on the format of the book, but as you're writing, that's where you can go ahead and put your source citation to keep track of them. If you try to remember how to do it later, you're going to forget some citations and then you're going to get mad at yourself, so we don't want to do that. Okay, so then you just go to the next record. Record by record, you make sentences by sentences until you have paragraphs, and then you tie those paragraphs together. So if we were continuing writing together, I would go to the 1910 census. I would do the same things that I did with the 1900 census, and I would keep going. Once you've exhausted all of the records you've gathered on MyHeritage, it's time to celebrate, right? We're all done. Well, no, we're not, sadly. Next, we want to do is we haven't gathered all of the available records that MyHeritage has available for us that identify our ancestor. So what we're going to want to do is go from the profile page on MyHeritage and click on that area right over there that says research this person. I zoom in so you can see that better. Research this person. What's going to happen is MyHeritage is going to take the information from this profile page, go import it into its search engine, and give you a lot of great results. So I'm going to go through a number of the type of records that you may be overlooking, and if you are, stop it. We're going to go and explore yearbooks. Oh my goodness. So I'll be honest, I didn't think that my ancestors would show up in yearbooks. She was born in 1895. She's age and ready for school in the 1920s. There can't be yearbooks. Oh, how wrong I was. And it's okay if you are still in that newbie genealogist space going, oh, I didn't realize that. We all start somewhere. So in MyHeritage, you're going to find the yearbook collection under the books and publication results in the search results. Click on that. And then when you see a name that you recognize, like Ohio State University, and yes, Buckeyes, I know I should say the Ohio State University. When you see the names of schools, then you know you have a yearbook. So MyHeritage really extracts some of the details so you can find your ancestor quickly. There's also ways to navigate through the entire yearbook, but what gets really great is when you see your ancestor's name in print. What gets even better is in the age of photos, when you see photos of your ancestors. Now, I don't have too many photos of Geraldine by herself, but I will take a group picture any day, wouldn't you? So now what do we do with the find that we found in the yearbook? Well, we do the same thing that we did with the 1900 census. We're going to turn it into a sentence. Now, the sentence begins as you would expect. She attended Ohio State University. Yes, I need to put a "the" in there if I'm going to make the Buckeyes happy. The years she attended and what she did. But remember, this is kind of boring. It's just a jumping off point. So let's go back. We're going to talk about who were the officers in the club that she participated with, who were her classmates. In the picture, we can talk about her hairstyle. We can talk about her physical features. If you have trouble describing physical features, in the handout, there's a link to a blog post that I have that talks about how to describe your ancestors' physical features. So I highly recommend you check that out. But we could talk about maybe assume what her height may be because she's in the middle. She's not exactly tall. She may not exactly be short. You can go and grab all those details and add it to this sentence. And now you have a paragraph about the time that she's in the history club at Ohio State University. But you want to explore the whole yearbook and find out what other things she is associated with, what is she studying, and so on and so forth. The next yearbook I had was a summer yearbook. Have you ever heard of these? It wasn't until I searched for Geraldine on MyHeritage that I realized that there was a summer session pamphlet put out, and Geraldine was a part of it. And so I could go and I can not only identify that she was at the age of 15, she's teaching, or student teaching, assisting, if you will, at the Ohio State University because she happens to live very close to the campus where she lived on Ennis Avenue. And we can go back to the entry. Who did she work with? What type of programs were offered? And then we can maybe look for other supporting evidence to find out how popular were these programs, and really turn this sentence into something amazing that you wouldn't have known to look had you not looked at the really cool records that are over on MyHeritage. So, periodicals. The yearbooks do fall into periodicals, but periodicals can cover the gambit of published works. This is a find that to me was incredible. I would never have looked for it had it not been in the MyHeritage collection. And just so you know, I don't work for MyHeritage, even though it feels like a sales pitch. But honestly, this has been a great social history website to research because here, transactions of the National Tuberculosis Association. Who would have thought? So I go into the entry and I discovered that Geraldine is participating in a study of people who had tuberculosis, and she was a tabulator. Now, I don't understand everything in that report, but there are things that I do understand, and then I can not only create this first sentence that she was part of the study, but I can explain more about that study so you know how cool it was. Now, newspapers. I like newspapers. Newspapers are funky. There's a lot of OCR errors, but I really like there is the newspaper collection on MyHeritage, and they help you get around some of the OCR problems. And I was able to find pictures in newspapers. You gotta love the age of pictures in newspapers. But you can use that picture. It doesn't really tell me a lot, right? I'm looking at this, and it's just a picture of her class when she began her training for nursing school in Boston. So she's left Ohio. She's now over in Boston. She's starting a new nursing school. But I can go back to that picture. I can talk about her height compared to everybody else. I can talk about her hairstyles. I can talk about her dress. I can talk about how many people were she in class with. There's so many details that are waiting for us to extract if we will just explore the newspapers. So then 2 years later, she's graduating, and I can have another picture. Unfortunately, I can't figure out which one she is because the rows aren't very clearly marked, and I think she's a little bit shorter than the people that she's standing next to, but I can take that entry and turn it into a sentence, and then turn that sentence into a paragraph discussing how long it took for her to graduate, what's going on, because I can explore the newspaper not only for what's happening, but to the state control of airlines. Hoover is honored in Dartmouth. I can talk about all of the things that are happening at the same time that she is graduating as a nurse. So next we can go and explore directories. I love city directories. And I love how easy MyHeritage has made it to research city directory. By far, that is my favorite technological research advancement of 2020, the MyHeritage Rapid Fire City Directory research tool. So if you want to learn about that tool, get an exposure to it, I do have a video over on my YouTube channel. Just look for city directories on MyHeritage over on Family History Fanatics on YouTube. You'll find it, and I might have just a little bit too many emojis on that video. So city directories are great because city directories can track your ancestor year by year in a specific place and time. Typically, they do favor the urban dweller more than the rural dweller, but there are some alternatives for rural ancestors. But look, I can see that she's there. She's a student. Her mother is a teacher, and the name of the school that her teacher is teaching at. There are so many great details, and you just take that record by record, turn them into sentence by sentence, and you start building out a story. Now, another directory, this fell under directories, but it was just a report of the city of Boston. This is super cool. It's not the coolest tidbit I learned about Geraldine on MyHeritage, but this was cool. It's something I wouldn't have discovered had MyHeritage not put that in their collection. So there's a city of Boston directory that talks about the different government officials and the hospital they had going on. And notice I have how much Geraldine was paid in 1918 and her increase of pay from $10 at the top, you can see, to $12 per month. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of calculators that I could figure out how much that is in modern day. But that's a really nice evidence that in 1918, she starts her nursing school. In 1920, she graduates, and look at how much she's making during her training. Again, start with one sentence based on that record, look through the rest of the record to expand it out to a longer story. Now, if you want to actually read these sentences, I know I'm going rapidly through them, be sure to just hit pause on the video, and then you can read it and continue on if you're watching the replay. So in 1920, this is super cool. She and three other ladies are now being paid $16.67. So she was at $12.50, now she's at $16.67, and she's getting a position as head nurse, and now she's making $65 a month. That is a significant increase of fund. It's more than doubled. It's great, and you have it articulated in this directory from the city of Boston, and I found it through MyHeritage. I didn't even know to look through there, so it was a really great find. And then you turn it into a sentence, expand it back, bring it from the previous entry, and tie them all together. Travel records. Okay, now we're going to get to the coolest discovery. Geraldine is amazing because in the travel record collection through Ellis Island passenger list, I didn't really think, she was in Ohio, she was in Boston, she winds up in McAllen, Texas. Well, it turns out that for a brief period of time, Geraldine and her family lived in Brazil because her husband was in the export business. And Geraldine took trips back to the United States from Brazil. And in this particular entry, it's April 1930. She's traveling with a 2-year-old. Her husband is not traveling with her. And before you think badly about him, we've got to be careful. We cannot necessarily read into records that aren't there. He is doing his business thing. So she's traveling home to see her mom because when we get this little bar to disappear, the address she's going to is where her mother is still living in Ohio. And check out, these records are really great because they have birth dates and places. So if you're ever without a birth date or place for your ancestor, you want to go check out these passenger records because you might actually find a birth date and place. And once you finish your rough draft, it is time to celebrate, but you're not done. Celebrate and go set it aside and then come back and edit and then format and then publish. The editing stage is probably going to take a while. This is when you're going to go back and you're going to take your to-do list that you didn't go back and research while you were writing. You just put it on your to-do list. You're going to do that. You're going to check your voice. You're going to determine your final audience. And then you're going to choose a format that fits that. Then you're going to add social history and so on and so forth. And then you're going to publish. But for the purpose of this seminar, I can't cover all of those details with you. So I have a playlist over on our YouTube channel. It's the Writing and Publishing Genealogy and Family History playlist. And there is quite a lot of videos that can take you through editing and writing and improving your draft. And if that's not enough, over on Legacy Family Tree webinars, there is also the training videos on writing that you have there as well. So I want you to dive into the archive. So I thought this was going to take hours and hours and hours, but that probably means that I can answer a ton of questions. So I want you to start putting your questions of writing that you were hoping I would cover that I haven't, so that Jeff can feed them to me after we do some door prizes. And then Jeff can come in and tell me how far did we get before I hit mute or something.
Okay.
And if I need to go back, we can cover those topics.
Good. So I've written down step by step here, and how you've taught this here today. It makes it seem like a realistic project, something that we can accomplish just one ancestor at a time. So I like how you did that. Hey,
thank you so much.
Sonia says, when you're marking up your graphics, and perhaps you put an arrow or something, and you want to use that in your publication, what kind of tool do you use to do that? Where you're highlighting with a box or with an arrow.
Okay, so there's a couple of programs that I use. One of the programs that I use is I will just do it straight into Google Docs if I want to highlight like a set of words. If I want to insert a call out, let me see. So let's say I want to insert, here's in Google Docs, I could just insert a table and I can put a really cool quote right here, right? And then I can also change the color of it. You can find how-to tutorials on how to change the color of that box, but now I can actually have a call out there. If you're trying to use a picture and mark up a picture, well, then that's when I'm going to use something like, I am a personal fan of Photoshop Elements for my scrapbooking days, and there are so many tutorials on how to do really cool things in Photoshop Elements. It does have a fee, but we're about to hit, I mean, today's Amazon Prime Day, but Black Friday's right around the corner, and I highly recommend people, if they're interested in getting Photoshop Elements, to get it around Black Friday, because it's usually the cheapest it is going to be all year. And not only can you mark up your photos, you can put metadata on it. You can organize your photos. You could do facial recognition with your photos, and you can also create video slideshows with it. So it can solve your one original question and then do so much more. So it's a program that I invest in. But here's the other great thing about it. You can keep it for 4 or 5 years. You don't always have to upgrade every year. So
yeah,
that's what I would recommend.
I'm on Photoshop Elements. I don't even know which version now, but yeah, I love it. I use it. Photoshop Elements 2018, it looks like,
yes.
is what I have.
Yes.
Cindy writes in saying version 2021 was just released. So yeah, look for that in these nice sales probably coming up.
Right, for sure. For sure.
Nancy has a question. She says, "So where do you stop? How do you know how many pages? How do you end?"
Yeah, how do you? That's a great question. When you are drafting, write until you have exhausted every piece of history that you have gathered for your ancestor, every document, every family legend. Yes, you can put family legends in there, just identify them as such, every physical description. You just keep writing until you have nothing else to write about that ancestor.
Okay.
Then when you go into the editing phase, one of the first stages of editing that we talk about in the blog post and accompanying video is your developmental editing. And that's when you can decide who are you actually going to give this to. It is better to have too much than not enough. But let's say you're going to write a children's book. Well, then you're going to narrow it down to maybe 1 or 2 stories from that book. If you're going to write a biography for an adult audience, as long as you've got good content, they'll read a 900-page book. I mean, we all War and Peace, anyone? Harry Potter's the book 7. So you stop in your first draft, keep turning every document into words, and then in developmental editing, then choose your audience, and then that will help you dictate, how many pages and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. Margaret asks, do you clip photos from MyHeritage, such as from the yearbooks, to then insert into your book?
Okay. I might get in trouble for this.
It's okay.
You're supposed to check copyright law.
Okay.
And yes. So I don't know what the legal answer is.
Oh, okay.
I know that I do. And I don't know if somebody's going to come and tell me I'm doing it wrong. But I always attribute where I get it. And so that, to me, gets me out of hot water. And the other thing is I don't publish my work, so I'm not going to be making any money off of it. I maybe run a couple copies for my relative. If you're going to try to sell your family history, then I think you really, really, really need to look at copyright law. But I'm not a lawyer. I did not give you legal advice. I told you what I do, and maybe MyHeritage will come and yell at me later.
Well, I like to turn to Judy Russell. She had a webinar once called Copyright Mythconceptions, and she explained what copyright is, what it covers, how long it lasts, and so I'll put that link in the chat area for those of you who are wondering about that.
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's a good question that all of us should consider.
Right.
Here's a question by Tiffany. She says, do you think that if I have just a few minutes or a short period of time to write a little bit, should I just write a paragraph or two and then later stitch together the full story? Or is it better to sit down and write a longer story at one period? She says, it seems like I would be more productive in writing these stories a little bit at a time due to time constraints in life.
Amen Hallelujah. You nailed it on the head.
Okay.
Because if you're waiting for a long block of time and your life is busy, you're not going to get it unless you plan for it. But it is so much better. Like, again, record by record, you have 5 minutes. I'm going to take one record and I'm going to turn it into a paragraph. And when the timer goes off, if I'm in the middle, I stop, and I already know where to pick up next time because I have my master document with my timeline and my story in there, and I just pick up where I left off. So yes, if you don't have lots of time, it is so much better to just write one little story at a time and stitch them all together. You're going to stitch it all together in the editing phase anyway. So yeah, absolutely. In your drafting phase, it's better to get the story written than to just wait for a big chunk of time.
Okay, thanks for your advice. Sherry writes in and she says, a friend of mine wrote up the history of one ancestor at a time and gave copies to each of her nieces and nephews for Christmas once a year. So Sherry, I'm glad to hear that it's worked well for you.
Absolutely.
Carol asks, does Devin self-publish? And if so, what program or what tool do you use to actually print the hard copy? Do you print a hard copy or an electronic copy? What's your preference?
Okay, that's a lot of questions, and your job is to keep track of which one I get to answer. Okay? All right. You're up to the challenge?
Yep.
So yes, I self-publish.
Okay.
I self-publish. So, but I got to remember, I'm a published author, and my how-to books I sell through KDP on Amazon. But my books for my family, I use lulu.com, Lulu.com, just like the girl Lulu. And I typically don't print a lot of hard copies. I'm in favor of soft copies, just because they're easy to replace and they're cheaper. The other thing I do that I really like about Lulu is that you can make your books listed as private. And then you can send those links, those private books, to just your family members, and they can order whatever copy they want. Because how many of you print a book and then it becomes a paperweight or the dog's, litter, and then the cat litter box or something, and you're just so discouraged. You put all this time into the book, and then you bought them one, and then you gave them one, and then they don't care. So what I do is I make it possible for them to, I give them a link to lulu.com, and then they can just buy it whatever they want. And if they want extra copies, or they also want the hardcover, it can easily transfer into a hardcover that way. Yeah, lulu.com. You have it on the screen. So what else? There was lots of questions in there. Self-published, yes. Where do I publish there? Oh, and the other thing about make it private is if you are writing about living people. So the story of my papa has living people in that story. I do not want the general public to come get that book. So because it's private and I only send the links to my family members, then it still retains that privacy of living people. But if you just want to make your book available, say you're writing about your third great-grandfather, nobody's alive in there, you can make it public, and then people can just buy whatever copy you want. So did I cover all the points?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I use Lulu also, and I've used it and have been very happy with it. And it's what I do is I have my book in Microsoft Word, and then I just save it as a PDF, and then I just upload it here to Lulu. And it's wonderful. I love it.
Yes. So that was the other part of the question she asked. So you could take your draft from Microsoft Office, or I could take mine from Google Docs, and then we could put it into Scrivener or InDesign or some other thing and make it really snazzy. You don't necessarily have to. There's a lot. Actually, I don't. I draft in Google and I format in Microsoft Office. It just has a lot more formatting options than Google Docs does. Yeah. So that's one little bonus tip. I format it in Microsoft Office just like you do, and then export it as a PDF and upload it. Now, if you don't know how to design a cover, maybe Jeff, you've done this, they have a cover wizard. and it just says add a title, choose a layout, add a picture, and that cover designer for your book, they'll walk you through the design as well.
Yeah.
But you could also make the cover over in Photoshop Elements. It'll give once you upload your manuscript, Lulu will give you a template, and then you can adjust that over in Photoshop Elements, or you can go over to Fiverr, Fiverr, and you can go over there and ask somebody to design a cover for you too. So there's several ways to get a cover designed.
What was the name of that? Fiverr?
Fiverr, Fiverr.
So if I go there, okay,
yeah,
interesting.
Yep.
I'm going to just pull it up here to take a look.
Yep. And you can do book cover design in the search.
Oh, okay.
And there'll be some people that you could, I keep hitting my microphone, book cover design, and you'll find people that do book covers.
Huh. Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right.
Yeah. It's a great resource. Mm-hmm.
I use something like this. I can't remember where I learned about it for one of my book covers, and boy, was I happy with it.
Good.
Just beautiful. Well, let's do...
I think Upworks is another one. UP, and then work, like you do work with an S on the end. Upworks is another one.
Huh, okay. Upworks. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's do a couple of door prizes, Devin, and then we'll get back to... We do have some more questions in here. Karen writes in, and she says, this is so inspirational to try to write something about each person. So, Karen, I'm glad that that's helped you here today. Okay, so our next webinar, the next of the MyHeritage webinar series, will be by James Tanner on Jumpstart Your MyHeritage Family Tree with Instant Discoveries. I think that's on October 27th, so 2 weeks from today. So, and James is always good. So sign in for him. We've got a couple of door prizes here. So we'll first do a 1-year MyHeritage complete plan. I mean, this is another reason we come to these webinars is for door prize time. All right, so the complete plan, it gives you everything. It gives you the family tree for your family, plus access to all of the wonderful records. Our winner is Delilah Treneman. I'm just writing down your name so we can contact you later. Okay, and then let's do a MyHeritage DNA test kit. Wish we could get the DNA of like my ancestors way back in time. We're getting closer to figuring that out. Okay, let's do a MyHeritage DNA test kit. And if your name is Cindy Barnes, then you're hopefully the very happy winner of this here today. You can do a little dance there at your home. All right. Okay, let's go back to some questions here. Okay, we did Carol, we did yours. Lily asks a question about when and where in the story that you're writing do you add any social history of the area that the person is living? Do you recommend to include that?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you asked it now. I didn't kind of want to put it in the main part because I wanted to encourage people to actually get something done. Okay. Social history tends to come in the editing phase, content editing phase. So developmental is when you decide your audience and your format and stuff like that. If you're writing for children's, you may put a little bit of social history just to give a context. But if the more mature the audience you're writing for, the more social history you can add. And every event, anytime you have an ancestor do something and it's documented, you can add social history. So the ship that Geraldine was on, I could talk about what was the design of the ship? How long did that trip take? maybe it didn't really tell me what class that she traveled in, but I could maybe investigate that further and figure out what were the conditions like when she traveled. Then I can talk about anything along the journey from New York to Ohio. I could talk about the politics that were happening that day. She had a baby, so I could also add, what were the medical discoveries or the way that babies were delivered in that time period. Social history happens after you know what your context is, and then you add more rich details to help people connect with the time and place. And I do talk about that in my book, and the book is listed in the handout, and that's the only self-promotion I'll do right there. But yes, there's always a time and place for social history.
Okay. By the way, the syllabus I've put the link to the syllabus in your chat area, everyone, so when she refers to that, there's a link there, and as part of the MyHeritage webinar series, that handout is available to everyone at no cost. Chris is wondering, how do I write stories about veterans in the family? He's wondering, should he keep them just under the stories just under the individual, or maybe put all the stories together of all his veterans and make a different kind of a book?
That is a great question. Until you have written about all your different veterans, I would write individual books, and then you can always piece together compilation stories and put all the veterans in one book. That would be kind of fun. But I find I learned so much more about an individual, the challenges they went through, the choices they made, what motivated them to go to the military. When they were in the military, what was the home life going on back home. So my grandpa, my papa, when he left, his wife had a daughter, his mother passed away. And there were a couple other things that happened while he was away, and I wouldn't have really got that until I focused on writing his story. And so then you can understand more about what is he feeling, what is he going through, and things like that. Now, if you're going to write a letters project, like you're going to transcribe letters, then I would keep that as a separate kind of book, and the back and forth, and add some social context just so people can understand, and keep that as a little bit away from a main story, because that could get really long. But for the military, I would highly encourage you to write everybody's individual story, so that when you do get to the compilation book, you have a really, really solid story.
Yeah, really good advice. I like how focus first on each individual and then combine them into one. That's great.
So let me tell you a little reason why I know that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
The idea just popped in. So both of my parents are deceased. All four of my grandparents were deceased. And then in the end of 2012, I suddenly became the person that knew what was going on in my family history.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm going to have heart disease. I've already had cancer in my leg. I just felt like this panic that if I don't turn everything I've gathered, all these stories that I know, and put them into story form, then I'm going to die and everything's going to go with me. It was just very taxing on the brain.
Yeah.
So what I did is I went up 6 generations, and I wrote about my mom, my dad, my grandparents, my 4 grandparents, my 8 great-grandparents, up back to 6 generations, and turned every single one of them into a story. And you think, God, and I did it in a year. Now, it's just drafts. Everybody's in a draft, right? Except for 2 of them that I published so far, and another one's halfway through the editing phase. But I could die tomorrow, and the drafts are ready to go for someone else to pick up where I've left off. And in writing that, that's where I discovered the advice that I just gave. I wrote about these people. I wrote about my Civil War ancestor. I wrote about his brother, which had a different experience. His brother continued to fight, and my great multiple grandfathers, he became sick and had a surgery that blinded him. And so he had a very different experience. And I didn't really understand them until I wrote about them separately. And now if I go and write, the Civil War ancestors that I have better stories. And so that's why I give that advice, is I'm not going to tell you something I haven't done.
Yeah. Well, June writes in saying, I can so relate to Devin's story of why she's writing those stories. And I wanted to show you this because you reminded me of this newspaper clipping that I found of my ancestor. His name was Asa C. Brown, and it says he was a Minnesota pioneer and a veteran of the War of 1812. And then here it said, had 7 sons and 5 grandsons in the Civil War, and they all came back alive. And what a fun newspaper clipping that was to have found. A viewer here said that he's. I removed your comment, but because we already responded to it. But a viewer said that he's writing or he wants to write a book about all of his Civil War ancestors, and so I think that's why he asked that question. So thanks, and really good advice. Well,
and this clipping could be the first page of the first chapter of your book. And then you can go in and talk about them. You can talk about Asa and then the sons and then 5 grandsons. But it would be really good to write about those people and tie it together, and then you have the hook.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, if that was on the front cover, I would definitely want to read that book.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. Well, good. Well, we've got through everybody's questions here. We've got lots of comments, people saying thank you and what a wonderful presentation. But Devin, do you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
I have a couple of final thoughts. Finding people to add to your tree is amazing. But if you really want to capture and preserve your legacy, you need to write stories. If you want the next generation to be interested in their ancestors, you have to write stories. And if you have dark stories, because we didn't actually talk about dark stories. Nobody asked, what about the dark stories? How do I write about, the criminal ancestor? Yeah. And I actually have some blog posts about that. So you can just go over to my blog and type in the search, writing about a criminal ancestor or an absentee father or all these other things. You don't want to whitewash history. It is what it was. But write these stories, get these stories, share these stories, because that's how you're going to make people connect to the past and strengthen your family's future.
And thank you. Remind us the link to your blog, Family History Fanatics.
Yes. So the general website is familyhistoryfanatics.com. You're going to see up on screen a button for blog, and that can take you to it. There's also a sub menu that talks about writing, or you can just type familyhistoryfanatics.com/blog. And you'll get there. Okay. And if you have more questions and you want them to me, you can email me, or you can just use the blog and then use the comments there, and I respond to the blog comments or the video comments, or there's lots of ways to get a hold of me. Primarily, you're going to find me on the blog and the videos rather than social. Yeah. Well, I'll be honest. I put it out there, but I'm active on the YouTube community, and I'm active on the Family History Fanatics blog.
Okay, so I've put that link in your chat log, everybody, familyhistoryfanatics.com. Well, thank you, Devin. It's been very nice. And yeah, I like how you didn't throw everything at us, and it just makes it seem like it's doable. So thank you for your advice, and we appreciate having you here. And thanks to all of the rest of you, wherever and whenever you are around the world. Sure. Appreciate you sharing your day with us. And let's see. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone. Bye, Devin. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.